Hi, welcome back to Giving Tree Surrogacy's podcast From Bump to Bond. I'm Kristi, your host. Today we are talking about the exciting topic of matching. So I'm joined by one of our matching specialists, the amazing Megan Cox. Thank you so much for joining. She will help us answer how someone finds the right surrogate and what does that process involve in matching. So Megan, if you can start by just talking through the steps in matching and what is involved in the matching process.
Sure, I'd love to. Matching really kind of starts, and I know you guys have met with Erica and Alan and about like our intended parent intake process and what that looks like. And so really I'm behind the scenes from that very point. Once an intended parent, meets with Erica or Alan and talks to them, about what they're looking for, a little bit about kind of their experiences and what has led them to this point. I'm already behind the scenes, kind of getting the information that I need. I'm reviewing that application that they fill out and kind of starting to understand a little bit about their specifics. Typically, once intended parents have signed up with us and they are passed over to matching and I join their team, as they're coming through their journey, I will offer an introduction call where I really want to get to know, I want to know the wish list. I want to know, in a perfect scenario, what does this perfect surrogate look like to you? And so I really start at that point, just getting an understanding of, obviously there's the logistical pieces, there's the medical history, and there's the location and things like that. But I want to get in a little bit more in terms of what would make them feel the most comfortable and the most safe and trustworthy in this process. So I have that introduction call with the intended parents to get to know them a little bit and a little bit more about their journey and their hopes. And at that point, I'll start to share some profiles. And I want intended parents to be brutally honest with me. I want, if the first profile, I send misses the mark, that's great. I'm fine with that, because I want that feedback that's going to help me make sure that I'm able to, narrow down and better understand what it is that they're looking for in a surrogate. That's the nice thing about Giving Tree, is with our little to no wait time, we have surrogates that I can look through, and I always talk about it like it's a puzzle. And that's what I enjoy so much about matching, is I can look at all the different puzzle pieces and really put them together in the best way possible. So I like all the feedback from intended parents, and that's kind of that next step, get to know you a little bit, share some profiles, and let's have a conversation back and forth about what looked good, what didn't look good, what felt right, what didn't feel right. And I think there's always, a level of gut feeling as you're reading, and as an intended parent, as you're reading a surrogate's profile, like, oh my gosh, this feels like it aligns really well, or we seem like we have similar interests, things that just kind of grab their attention outside of those, obvious matching points.
So when you say a wish list, when an intended parent comes to you and they kind of have a wish list, because we work with such a diverse group of intended parents, cancer survivors, LGBTQ plus community members, what else, hetero couples, single parent by choice. So we're providing support and guidance for all different types of IPs. So what would you say is kind of a common wish list, and what are the things that you find maybe certain backgrounds of intended parents, maybe they tend to have a typical wish list?
Yeah, I think, I don't know that I see much of a difference from intended parent to intended parent based off, if it's a couple that's here because of infertility, or an LGBTQ plus member, coming to us. What I really see is they're looking at what their fertility doctor has suggested to them. I think that's always first and foremost in their mind. They're like, my doctor has said this would be perfect. And so that's fantastic. We want to get those key points. And another nice part about having the matching specialist in place is that I'm familiar with a lot of these fertility clinics, and I have their specific criteria, so we can look through that. But outside of those medical things, I think a wish list typically, geography is a big thing. Some people really want to be, at every appointment and as involved as possible, and really want to be a close part of that journey. And that's totally understandable. So geography is definitely a big piece when it comes to the wish list. But we also see other things like, I want them to just have similar values to me, or I want us to have those similar interests, or I want her to be married or partnered, or I want her family to be close. And I think that speaks, obviously everybody wants a great support system. That's very important for a surrogate to have a strong support system. So we see that kind of come through in the wish lists as well. Some intended parents get more specific in terms of, surrogates that are willing to compromise on things such as diet or activity restrictions or things like that. So some of that comes into play from time to time, but typically they're looking at those, I think, things that are a little bit more off of vibes. I hate to use that word, but it just is something that connection. So I think that comes into the wish list, and that's sometimes I always talk to the intended parents about how hard it is to convey some of these things over, a paper document. It's hard to know if you're going to have that connection just by reviewing a profile. And so one of the great things about Giving Tree is that, there's no commitment, no major commitment outside of a match call. You can meet a surrogate, get to know her, and decide afterwards if that feels like the right fit for you. So, our intended parents are given multiple options when they sign up in terms of what package they would like to choose, but they get to have that match call with no pressure of, having to say yes afterwards. We want them to have that power to kind of get to know your surrogate and decide if that's the right fit, because it's hard to get that out of a paper document that you're reviewing in a profile.
Yeah, I think it brings up a couple of things and to me in mind that number one, their relationship with you is important because they're likely going to end that call that you're on and kind of facilitating that match call and say, okay, these are the things that we really liked. These are the things that now we're kind of needing follow-up information about. And so that relationship is important to have, as well as the ability to go into this with maybe some expectations, but also being open-minded to certain things. And that, at the end of the day, we're all human. And so kind of meeting someone in the middle of this process and taking that leap with someone. And I can only imagine what those emotions feel like, because it's not a meeting to see if this is someone that you're going to go to dinner with. They're going to carry your baby. So it's a big decision. And I can imagine that, there may even be some follow-up questions. Is that kind of typical that you may end a call and hopefully you've covered everything that both parties want to talk about and need to talk about before moving forward? But do they reach out to you and say, actually, this kind of gave us more questions that we have?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you brought up the open-mindedness piece, because I always say that to my intended parents when I'm talking about the wish list. And I want to jump back to the open-mindedness piece. You mentioned that, and I always talk to my intended parents about that as we're going through, their ideal wish list and what that looks like. I make sure to tell them, I want to check every box, right? That's obviously the goal, but that isn't always, reality. And I always preach about open-mindedness, and that I don't want to take any more power away from intended parents than what they already have had taken from them in this process. So I want to make sure that I'm sharing, if she hits 8 out of 10 boxes, I want to share that profile. I want you guys to have, you as the intended parents, to have the opportunity to review that profile and make a decision based on the entirety of it, rather than just, okay, she hit 10 out of 10, expectations. If she comes close, I want you guys to be able to review that and have that opportunity to say yes or no. But to answer your question about, follow-up questions and things like that, I'm sure every intended parent I've ever met with can say that they've heard me say this line, because I end every call with it. If you're like me, you will get off this call and think of 4 more things you wish you would have asked, 10 more things you wish you would have asked. Please, 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 please. This is a big decision, and it's so important that you feel like you have all the information necessary. So I always encourage both sides, the surrogate and the intended parents, send me all the questions that you have. If there's so many that we need to have a second call, then we need to have a second call, and that's okay. But, obviously, if I can get those questions answered to your satisfaction through email, I'm happy to do that, and want to make sure that they feel fully informed before deciding, it's a huge decision. Like you said, you're not going to dinner. It's a big deal, and you need to make sure that you have every question answered so that you can move forward confidently. So absolutely.
So if both parties do say yes, then what are your next steps behind the scenes in your role as a matching specialist?
Absolutely. So simultaneously with the match call, I go ahead and send medical records to the fertility clinic so that they're already underway. The pre-approval process of medical records, depending on what clinic, can vary. It can, take a few days to a week, or it can take a month to a month and a half. It really just depends on the clinic. So I get those records sent out as soon as both parties agree to a match call. I get those records sent out right away. So that's kind of happening simultaneously. And then hopefully we kind of cut down on that waiting period from the excitement of like, yes, we've said yes, we're ready to move forward. And then it's like, oh, hurry up and wait again, because isn't that just like the epitome of surrogacy, right? Is everything is a hurry up and wait. So
Right.
so I try to cut down on that. In the meantime, I connect with the intended parents, make sure I'm is supporting them in that waiting process, because I know that part is difficult. And once we have the medical records pre-approved, that's when we're going to add to the team from Giving Tree, and we're going to add the case coordinator in. And so they're going to meet their case coordinator at that point, and they're going to begin the process of scheduling that medical screening, establishing the escrow account, getting that medical screening scheduled, and then on to legal, and then transfer. We usually estimate, the legality part of it is definitely the biggest variable there in terms of timeline. But we usually estimate from like match date to transfer date to be about 3 to 5 months. And again, that's always going to depend on the fertility clinic and what attorneys are involved. But it really starts to pick up at that point. There's a lot of steps along the way to get ready for transfer. So that's kind of what's happening once everybody says yes.
Yeah, I think we tend to refer to this timeline as the hurry up and wait for the surrogates too, when they're first applying and we're waiting on their medical records to be received from the different facilities. It's always a hurry up and wait type process. And the matching piece, I think, is one of the most exciting parts of a journey, the match, and then of course the delivery of the baby. And so you getting to be a part of that has to just feel really exciting, emotional. I'm sure that you feel the emotions of that process for intended parents and for surrogates. Are there instances where someone may have a match call and they say no and they don't want to move forward? What does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. It does happen. I like to toot my own horn and pat myself on the back and say that I hope if you've decided to move forward with a match call that I've done a great job in terms of matching, but that isn't always the case. And so if that does happen and you get off the call and you're like, wow, this is not what I expected. And here's a couple more things I think I want to add to my wish list and things like that. That is okay. As I mentioned before, I would rather you get on a call and have that opportunity to get to know the surrogate off paper, and really get a good understanding. Because I think a lot of this decision, obviously there's the important pieces, but a lot of this comes down to gut feeling and did it feel right when you were meeting them? So if it doesn't feel right, that's okay. We go back to looking at more profiles. And again, one of the great things with Giving Tree is we do have that option and that low to no wait time for an intended parent to have another chance to look at more profiles, make another decision, meet another surrogate. So as I mentioned in the profile sharing piece, like the more feedback, the better. So after that match call, if you're like, here's where it fell apart, here's where it went wrong, that's more information for me to make a better match, and also more information for me to facilitate maybe differently on the next match call. If there was something that they felt like wasn't covered well enough or something like that, that's always great feedback. And we're always, I want to tweak and learn with you guys as the intended parents and what we can do to find the better fit for you.
Yeah, and I think it's a learning process for intended parents too, that, they're probably learning about they don't know what they don't know
You
until
don't
they
know
get
what you
into
don't
that
know. Yeah.
call and then think, "Oh, actually this was really important to me," or "This
Yeah.
will be moving forward really important to us." And so they're learning throughout that process too, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And I think just being honest and open about what what you're really looking for and what you're needing is the most important piece.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Did you have something to add to that?
No, I think we were going to the same place. I was going to say there's some that don't work out, but there's also some that go so beyond perfect. And you mentioned like how this is such a exciting time of the journey, right? The match. And I think that's why I've stayed in matching. I've been in the industry for 5 years now, and I've been in matching the entire time. And I can't imagine doing any other piece of it because you really get some of those perfect fits that really just pull at your heartstrings. And, I can think of one specifically. I had a set of intended parents and a surrogate that met, and the intended mother was so passionate about wanting somebody that would be willing to go through this journey in a really natural and holistic way. And I think that, that's something that's a little rare in such a scientific journey, right? Everything is so controlled throughout this process, with this amazing science that we have access to. But they really wanted something that was going to be really natural and holistic. And the surrogate was on board, and she had had natural home deliveries herself. And I just remember the intended mom and her really connecting over. She talked about how it was something that she envisioned for her journey, like when she was thinking she would get to carry her baby. And that was something that was really important to her. And so they got down into the nitty gritty in that match call about, what that would look like for them, with the intended mom and her hopes of what that would look like for herself and the surrogate. And it just was a really beautiful match. Everything aligned so well, logistically and obviously medically and all that, but really just like their core values of who they were and, what pregnancy and family meant to them. And they just connected so well that the match call hosted itself. It was one of those that I'm like, I don't need to be here,
Yeah,
but
I
it's
can
so
just
great.
leave now.
Yeah, exactly. I'll just sit back here and you all just let me know when you're done. And those
Yeah,
are some of the best ones, that you really feel that connection right off the bat for
yeah.
those parties. So
It's incredible. I think it just takes a lot of strength to say, this is what I envision for myself. I need help in getting this. I can still have this. And we're adding in another person to this experience and finding a way that they can all fit together in, like what you referenced, this puzzle
yeah,
is so beautiful. And like you said, different experiences of what someone's looking for. Sometimes that's a very straightforward, very medical hospital delivery,
yep,
because there is a need for someone to feel like there is some control and some planning and some consistency there. And other times it's a more natural approach, and that's what they envisioned. And we can accommodate both and have surrogates that are open to both, which is just so beautiful. So, is there any piece of advice that you give intended parents before a match call, to prep them for things, and what they should kind of expect going into the call?
as I'm scheduling, I always send both my intended parents and my surrogate what I call my cheat sheet. And it's kind of a what to expect. Here's kind of the topics that we talk about during the match call. And I think one of the great things, I'm on that call and I'm there to facilitate. I know it can be an uncomfortable conversation. You're talking about a very intimate process and a very intimate journey, and you're getting on the phone with a stranger. It can be uncomfortable. People are nervous. There's some anxiety there. And so I like to send out the cheat sheet ahead of time so that they can prepare themselves, kind of know what we're going to talk about. If they have questions they want to add to it. And I always offer both parties, if there's a question that you want to ask, but you don't know how to ask it, or you're nervous to ask it, you don't want to come across wrong, I said, send me those questions. I will ask the tough things.
I
And
love that.
that's something that I want to offer to them so that they can go into it not feeling the pressure of, what some of those questions can entail. So I always start with that when I'm in the planning process of the match call. And then once we're on the match call, I am there the whole time. So I start with introductions. I let them, share a little bit about their journey to this point, as much as they're comfortable sharing. I let the surrogate share about her family and what brought her to surrogacy and how her and her family decided this was, a journey that they wanted to embark on. I tend to go in order if the call doesn't quickly progress on its own. Sometimes, they're off and running. They have their own questions. They start, and I kind of take that back seat if I can. But if it doesn't, I don't allow, the awkward silences. I'm popping in with questions, making sure that it feels as natural as possible. And I tend to cover the medical stuff first. You never want to end a phone call talking about, does everybody align on termination? What about selective reduction? Like some of these things that are very sensitive. I don't want to end a call on that. So I'm going to get those addressed quickly. Obviously, they're very important to talk about, but I want them to happen at the beginning so that stuff, we talk about the more fun stuff of the journey, right? As the call progresses. And it kind of flows in a timeline, really, as you go through the journey. What kind of communication are you all expecting or wanting throughout this journey? What does attending appointments look like? What does delivery day look like? What type of requests or restrictions would you have for your surrogate? There's so many things that we kind of go through. Do you guys align in terms of privacy on social media? A lot of different things. So, like I said, I get that cheat sheet out ahead of time so that they have time to prepare. And, I think one of my favorite questions is asking about breast milk, and intended parents are always like, I haven't even thought about that. And I'm like, right. Like there's things that you don't know until you know, right? So all of those things are super important, and we make sure that we talk about them in the match call. And I make sure of it. If it doesn't happen naturally, if those questions don't come up naturally between them in conversation, I pop in and I'm like, hey, have you guys thought about this? And give them opportunity to kind of think about it and respond. And some, like I said, are off and running and having their own conversations. And that's great. They're really getting to know each other and it feels very natural. And others feel more facilitated, but there's also nothing wrong with that either. Again, you're strangers. Always makes me think when I'm talking about like match call prep. I had a same-sex couple meeting with a surrogate one time, and they called me the night before and they told me, Megan, I have not been on a first date with a woman in 20 years. I have no idea what I'm supposed to say to this woman. And I think it's funny that it really does feel like an awkward first date, right? Like it's a blind date. You don't know what to expect. And I think having that third party mediator there to really help ask the questions, make sure all the important things are talked about, but also just kind of break the ice and join in on conversation if it's appropriate to kind of help everybody just feel a little bit more at ease.
I think that makes such a world of difference, having the matching specialist as this mediator and almost as like a security blanket too. I would think of it as that, going into it feeling like, okay, if it gets awkward, she's going to be there to jump in and get things back on track, or potentially ask questions that I didn't think that I wanted to know the answer to, but I ultimately do. So I think that it sounds like the tips would be to go into it with an open mind, to be honest about what you're really looking for, and that open-mindedness to consider things that may be not, in particular on your list that is an absolute no, to just have an open mind and learn more about the other person and what is bringing them to this experience. And some of the things to look out for, like you said, is really a gut feeling, which is so interesting, that sometimes there's no real explanation of why you're connecting with this person, but you've crossed paths for some reason and you're ready to move forward and experience this new life-changing experience together, which is so incredible that you get to do that all the time and be a part of that. Do you find yourself reaching out after the match or looking or connecting with the case manager once someone's matched that you've really connected with to see kind of where they're at in their journey, how things are going?
I do frequently. And one of the things that I love so much about Giving Tree is, our Monday staff meeting, getting to hear the updates. Every single week I hear where those cases are at. And so I think that's so great. Not only, to celebrate once they get to the birth, but just to celebrate like, oh my gosh, they got medical clearance. And like, I just passed them to the case case management team, a couple weeks ago and they already have medical clearance. How exciting for them. Or, just little things like that. And I find myself occasionally reaching out and being like, oh my gosh, I heard, you guys signed contracts today. Congratulations. And I, just think it adds not only to our fulfillment as professionals, right, in terms of getting to see this journey come full circle. But I think it just speaks, to the agency as a whole too, as we're all so involved and all there to support. And I think I've said it a couple times, like, while yes, we're passing you to a new team, we're adding to your team. And I think that is so valuable with us, just in terms of having so many people there to support the case coordination team as well, through that journey. And we're all here supporting and cheering them on the entire way. So.
Yeah. And even through the quiet moments of the journey too, that they have someone reaching out and staying in communication with them, not just through the milestones, but through kind of the quiet moments that I feel like, we can all kind of look back on times in our lives where you think of what has happened over the last several months. How is it already, October, and where did all of the time go? And so even just highlighting the small victories that, your surrogate was, her medical screening appointment was booked. Like that's a milestone, even if it's not the biggest ones, that we're celebrating all of the small steps that lead us to the end result that we're all working towards, which is them coming home with their baby. So
absolutely.
So thank you once again for joining us today to share such valuable insight about the matching process. It's such an exciting, but can be such a nerve-wracking time. And you are really there and provide amazing support to these intended parents to find their perfect match in a surrogate. So thank you for joining. Be sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Spotify to stay tuned for our next episode. And we'll see you there.
Giving Tree Surrogacy. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who might find it just as thought-provoking.